Picking up where we left off. Seems really, as the weeks tick by, more and more obvious to me that this work, the scholarship represented by this article, is really important because everyone's looking around for some sign of opposition to what's happening. And there's a sense of despair that's set in, completely understandably, around the notion that it's hopeless and that all the exits have been sealed and we're all going to get sacrificed, right? And the idea that there's any true opposition or saviorship or opposing viewpoint or anything, as seems the chances of that seem less and less by the day. Some people don't even feel that that's even possible. So this article, I suggest, is extremely substantial because it goes back so far, 3,000 years, and because Lyndon LaRouche was a true polymath who could map this stuff out and put it into a form that could be followed fairly easily by the attentive mind. As to whether or not this other faction, this quote-unquote good faction, still exists, or whether it's been thoroughly compromised and corrupted by the other side, I don't know. But we can at least begin to identify the characteristics of this historical opposition to what we're all being traumatized by. So that's essentially why I'm reading this, and why I'm getting back on the horse and making my way through the whole article. It's because the urgency behind this debate just keeps increasing, understandably. So we have now, in this section, Aristotelian religious cults. Apart from the work of spying, encyclopedism, and poisoning, the principal production of the peripatetics included the production of new religious and quasi-religious cults. It is not entirely without significance that portion of the Thames suffering the misfortune to lie near Oxford is named the Isis. We have already referred to the synthetic cults of Egypt, e.g. the Isis-Osiris cult, and others produced by the... Here we have something on the French Revolution, which I'll get into. French Revolution, a product of British intelligence. I hope you all know that, but we'll get in. There's a whole wonderful article I'll read to back that up and to document it. So what was the end of that sentence? But really, this is worth, let me just grab this. The Paris mob, organized by British intelligence on the paradigm of the Phrygian Dionysiac mobs of antiquity, was celebrated by the neoclassical quote-unquote painters who emerged from the French Revolution. In Eugene Delacroix's Liberty at the Barricades, 1830, liberty is depicted approvingly as a Dionysian Maenad, and she and her fellow rioters portrayed the detail of the Phrygian caps which the British furnished their lumpenized Parisian stooges. Beautifully put. Anyway, let me go back. Yeah. We've already referred to the synthetic cults of Egypt, produced by peripatetics under the Ptolemies. Oh dear, wait, hang on. The same method used to this purpose by the peripatetics have been continued by their emulators down to the present day. Such British intelligence service creations as the Hare Krishna cult, the, quote, children of God, I don't remember them, and the so-called Moonies are only the most obvious and notorious such concoctions. The Maoist organizations of North America and Western Europe are based on the same methods and techniques of cult design, as is the British intelligence-created rock drug counterculture, the, quote, environmentalist movement, and the overlapping organization of international terrorism. The methods of creating synthetic religious cults as instruments of state, domestic, and foreign policies is known in some significant detail since Babylon. The original synthesis of what later becomes the Jewish religion represents only one form of such Babylonian synthetic religious cults. Wow, this is fascinating. Puts a whole new perspective on it, on what the world is undergoing, which, seems to be almost the puncturing of its most sacred inner core of humanity by this whole question of Zionism/Judaism and its horrific, atrocious excesses that seem to go unchallenged, and what has led the human race to tolerate this kind of this word barbarity doesn't even cover it. But I think we might find some answers in evaluating this paragraph here. Let me just go back. The methods of creating synthetic religious cults as instruments of state, domestic, and foreign policies is known in some significant detail since Babylon. The original synthesis of what later becomes the Jewish religion represents only one form of such Babylonian synthetic religious cults. It is not the details of these cults that ought to occupy our attention here, but rather the characteristic features of such cult design from then to the present time. The usual form of the religious cult down to the Christian era was associated with a pantheon of polymorphs, gods and semi-deities whose images combined either features of several animals into one form, or which combined human and animal forms. The essential political effect of such religious cults is to destroy the concept of a qualitative distinction between man and the lower beasts. These were indeed all greeny religious cults. The interesting distinction of the Jewish cult among the usual polymorphous productions of the Babylonian Foreign Office, quote-unquote, is evolution over subsequent developments away from the polymorphous image of worship. However, otherwise, the Babylonian created cult of Judaism was the most thorough of the ancient zero-growth cults. There's a lot packed in there. Indulge me. Let me just read those passages. Just please consider this and carry this away with the intention of trying to understand and follow what might have led out of it and what might have led into this, if that makes any sense. The interesting distinction of the Jewish cult among the usual polymorphous productions of the Babylonian Foreign Office is evolution over subsequent developments away from the polymorphous image of worship. However, otherwise, the Babylonian created cult of Judaism was the most thorough of the ancient zero-growth cults. Although the following involves an included element of speculation, the elements of knowledge drawn upon as circumstantial evidence are valid without question. Only the specific historical connection we interpolate for further investigation of the matter is properly considered speculative. It is known that the Israel and adjoining nations of the period of Saul, David, and Solomon, especially Solomon's Israel, were buffer states of the Phoenicians, e.g. Tyre, in a manner consistent. Let me read that again. I inflected that wrong. It is known that the Israel and adjoining nations of the period of Saul, David, and Solomon, especially Solomon's Israel, were buffer states of the Phoenicians, e.g. Tyre. Okay. In a manner consistent with city builders' policies, the backward people of Israel had been brought up largely to a civilized state through a city builder program. Hence the Freemason legend of the early Freemasons as Phoenician-trained builders of the Temple of Solomon, which I wasn't aware of that. It is also known that there was no trace of Judaism as later defined, but rather a strong influence of the cult of Baal, otherwise widespread throughout the region, together with Phoenician cults. We also know, from the standpoint of epistemology, that the characteristic philosophical outlook of Thales, Heraclitus et al. Is an expression of the world outlook upon which the city builder's culture converges. Hence, philosophical beliefs converging upon the views of the Ionians, Socrates, and Plato were in fact influential among the leading strata of Eastern Mediterranean city builders prior to the Ionian period, including, therefore, leading strata in Israel. The function of the Babylonian creation of the Jewish religious cult was to transform the people of Israel into an advanced post-Babylonian puppet state for Babylon's war against Tyre. Read that again. The function of the Babylonian creation of the Jewish religious cult was to transform the people of Israel into an advanced post-Babylonian puppet state for Babylon's war against Tyre. Consequently, the Babylonians were constrained by the kinds of religious belief which already existed in an area strongly influenced by Phoenician culture. Hence, the ordinary sort of polymorphous image cults might not have succeeded in that region. We know also that the city builders and their anti-humanist adversaries often did not attempt to directly uproot existing mythologies, but rather to recodify existing mythologies in such a way as to serve the policy of the state. The mythology was adjusted to embody, as a mythology, the impulses appropriate either to a city builder's or anti-humanist policy. And this is really interesting because it parallels exactly, when you talk about the city builders versus the anti-humanist policies, then we can very easily jump forward in time to the Guelphs and the Ghibellines, the Guelph being the anti-humanist bankers of Venice, and the Ghibellines being the heirs of Charlemagne, and the Hohenstaufen, the city builders of the Holy Roman Empire. The thrust on the humanist or city builder's side throughout the known sources is toward the deified human hero or heroine, for which the Heracles Prometheus model is typical, the giver of knowledge, reason to a whole people. The anti-humanist policy emphasizes the opposite policy. It proposes the irrationality of the deities. It insists upon the unfathomable mystery of the order of the universe. On this basis, we cannot confidently assumed that the existence of image worship in itself meant one thing or the other. Only the features of image worship or other forms of worship which are characteristically Platonic or anti-Platonic are solid evidence. The durability of the synthetic religion of Judaism through its various evolutions up to the Christian era and its survival after the onset of that era reflects the cumulative environmental selective effect of the Platonic, Neoplatonic revolts against the older form of religious, polytheistic, anti-humanist cults. This revolt took its decisive form in the rise of Christianity, which was, politically and philosophically, a Platonic, Neoplatonic upsurge within the Hellenistic world against the monstrous evil represented by the Holy Roman. Sorry about that. Didn't give anyone a heart attack with that. Against the monstrous evil represented by the Roman Empire and Roman law. I would love to. I need to find out exactly what he's getting at with this pegging Roman law on this monstrous evil represented by this faction, because I'm a real big law is like my passion, in international law more specifically, but I've been turning my attention to Roman law off and on when I have time, and so when I've encountered this, it gave me a bit of a shock. I'd like to know what LaRouche, what his attitude. I can see his attitude, but how he came to this conclusion about Roman law representing the monstrous evil. This same principle is going on. The same principle is reflected in the original political thrust of the Prophet Muhammad and in the emergence of the Ismaili current within Islam. During that latter period, Judaism itself was divided between the reactionary Orthodox currents and the tendency for humanistic, Neoplatonic transformation of Judaism, the emergence of the humanistic Sephardic current out of the Ismailite Judaic faction, and the emergence of the Maimonides, Avenkibrol et al. He was Avenkibrol, probably it's because it's a Latinization of a Jewish mystic poet who was a Neoplatonist, and his name, he was Solomon ben Yehuda ibn Gabirol, and it was born in the 11th century, and his name was Latinized, and that's how we get this Avenkibrol. Born in Malaga. Interesting guy. Of the Toledo school reflect the course of the latter aspect of the development. In general, the main course of development of religious and philosophical belief among humanist and humanist-influenced currents has been away from the polytheistic image-centered doctrines toward the logos principle and toward the Trinity doctrines as exemplified by the internal determinations of the Platonic dialogue. The survival of Judaism coincides with the effect of such circumstances. It is merely in itself a plastic form of belief which can be made either humanistic or anti-humanistic, and serves the latter purpose with the advantage of being ancient and also largely free of the incredible hated polytheistic forms which were discarded in the wake of the Mediterranean worldwide hatred of Roman Latin imperial order. Another decisive feature of Judaism is the ancient association of nominal Jews with banking. This won't interest anyone, but I'll just read it anyway. Okay. Throughout the period from Babylon into the persecution of the Jews during the 13th century and afterwards in Europe, one faction of Jews was continuously associated with monetarist policies of finance throughout the Mediterranean littorals, whereas the other faction, the medieval Sephardic faction, especially during the Christian era, was associated with Ismaili humanist, I'm probably mispronouncing that, humanist policies of opposition to monetarist financial policies. Despite the inevitable large-scale assimilation of Jews into the mainstream of the cultures in which they were situated, a kernel of Jewry remained defined and otherwise self-defined as outsiders to the mainstream of the cultures in which they resided, and so forth and so on. The relevant points should be clear. This fact we shall encounter below in the connection with the Pier Leone. On their side of the matter of religion, the work of the Peripatetics was directed to the same objectives as their frauds in knowledge generally. In philosophy, the Peripatetics sought to poison the second level of Platonic knowledge, the mere understanding, against knowledge of the scientific method, reason. In religion, they treated the lowest state of human knowledge, simple beliefs of the ignorant masses, to the same purpose. The object was to promote irrationalist beliefs, agreeable to state policies of zero growth, and monetarist oligarchical rule. As you see, both of these, neither of these is anything new. It's astonishing. Just please feel how astonishing that is. I'm just bloody astonished to hear this phrase, this term zero growth and monetarist oligarchical rule in these ancient references here. The same sort of project was launched by British intelligence services during the 1920s, with the evil Bertrand Russell the central figure in this operation. During the 1920s, Russell, as a principal spokesman for the effort, laid out a spectrum of projects, all aimed to bring about a new dark age through which an oligarchical-ruled feudalist utopia could be established on a world scale, which this dark cloud is very much upon us, and even the invocation of the term cloud is not purely metaphorical. We see, the spraying of the planet with the deceptive rationale that it's trying to save us from global warming, but it's a cloud. It's a toxic cloud. And it embodies exactly what we're discussing here. Russell proposed the end of progress in basic scientific knowledge. British radical empiricists and their Vienna positivist energeticist collaborators ganged up against Max Planck, Erwin Schrödinger, de Broglie, and others in aid of this project. Max Planck, I think he made the assertion that consciousness comes before matter, that the created universe comes as a result of consciousness, which would go along with what we're reading here. I believe that's the humanist perspective. It's not the materialist perspective, certainly. And empiricism and materialism and monetarism all go together as in this anti-human project. This represented an attempted final solution, quote unquote, to the attack against continental science, which had been continuous British policy since the wretched Francis Bacon's attack on William Gilbert and the British Royal Society's vendettas against Descartes and Leibniz. The central figure in this was British agent Niels Bohr. Bohr's hideous conduct towards Schrödinger and others, the founding of the irrationalist Copenhagen School, and the hooligan uproar against leading scientific thinkers at the 1920s Solvay Conference, have to look into that, were leading features of the Russell-linked operations against scientific progress. The continuous campaign of the British against nuclear and fusion energy development from World War II period to the present day is partly the Black Guelph oligarchy's campaign against technological progress, and also a continuation of Russell's project for destroying the progress of science from within. We've certainly seen the apotheosis of that with the COVID genocide. Russell, when I'm talking, of course, about the injections, Russell also proposed the application of existing scientific technology to the purposes of mass mind control, including the development of drugs for mass use for this purpose. Aldous Huxley's Brave New World and others leading roles in promoting psychedelic drugs and drug cultures are part of the implementation of that British Black Guelph project for mass drug addiction. We also see that. Hard to imagine it getting any worse in the United States. You have these synthetic drugs that, my God, all they do is just eat you from within. I don't think they've just, it's not like LSD or mushrooms or anything that would bestow these spiritual experiences. These are just synthetic rot. Russell was more directly active from that point onward in the development of what became known as linguistics. This is the form of linguistics most popularly associated with the name of former Rand Corporation associate Professor Noam Chomsky, the gatekeeper from hell. Russell, working closely with long-standing British intelligence operative Karl Korsch and with Carnap and others, launched linguistics in the United States during the 1930s. These idiot Americans who just ate it up. Also in intersection with the work of the fascist sociologist, social work brainwasher, Dr. Kurt Lewin. Noam Chomsky, whose work is used prominently and directly for the development of explicitly brainwashing techniques, is a direct protege of the apparatus set up under Russell's leadership. Russell, Korsch, Carnap, Chomsky, linguistics extend the methods of synthetic religious cult building of the peripatetics to an extreme. I think we need to really take note of that. The cognitive feature of the use of language is systematically outlawed wherever linguistics methods are employed. Let me read that again. The cognitive feature of the use of language is systematically outlawed wherever linguistics methods are employed. The philosophical outlook of the cult of Dionysus is central to linguistics. There is no universal lawfulness, but only the heteronomic impulses and desires of the individual and small group. In other words, the doctrines of Thomas Hobbes, also perceptibly adopted by the Nazi regime as appropriate to its character. Maoism, the rock drug counterculture, environmentalism, and the philosophical environment of the British-created international terrorism and its sympathizers are all forms of the cult of Dionysus developed during recent decades with majority complicity from a corrupt press and universities in the promotion and application of Chomskyan linguistics.